So all these wonderful artists and more were in Lisbon this summer for democracy events hosted by our moderator, U.S. Ambassador to Portugal, Randi Charno Levine. Ambassador Levine drives her diplomacy with culture and the arts. In fact, she was the first to invite the Arts and Embassies Democracy Collection, where she hosted a series of events at cultural institutions around Lisbon, opening with First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. Ambassador Levine, it's your show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to the Office of Arts and Embassies. I am honored to be here to join in this programming celebrating the 60th anniversary of Arts and Embassies, and of course, the important work that this program does to showcase the best of America's creativity and talent and innovation. As the U.S. Ambassador in Portugal, I work closely with Arts and Embassies and also my dear friend, Curator Anna Sokoloff. Anna, could you give us a shout out there? There she is. To create and curate this collection for Casa Carlucci, which is the iconic U.S. Ambassador's residence in Lisbon. So when I was asked to serve back, even before I came out to post in 2022, I said to myself, okay, what do I want this residence, which is really the forward face of diplomacy for America, to look like? And how should it appear to the many folks who are coming by, whether it's heads of state, heads of the military, Portuguese, international American citizens? And for me, America's strength comes from its incredible diversity, the rich tapestry of cultures that really defines us. So we thoughtfully, and as many of you know, lovingly compiled this collection entitled Celebrating Diversity, Democracy, and Representation in Contemporary Art, to bring together contemporary works, voices, and issues as presented by some of the most talented, we have some here, and diverse artists, both in the United States and Portugal. So on the screen behind us, you will see the many artworks that feature leading African-American artists, groundbreaking women, LGBTQIA+, as well as Asian American, Latino American, Palestinian American, Iranian American, Jewish American artists, among others. We took our charge very seriously. I have had the privilege of seeing the Democracy Collection and the Diversity Collection in action, how the pieces provoke thoughtful conversation about social justice, about representation, and about democracy, and how, as we hoped, this art generates conversations, often difficult conversations, about some of the most pressing and important issues of our time. It has been truly an honor to live amongst these important works of art and these artists, and to share them with all of the folks that come through Casa Carlucci. As many of you know, in June, we welcomed First Lady Jill Biden to host and open the Democracy Collection at Católica University in Lisbon, and we held a satellite celebration of the 60th anniversary in Lisbon that was attended by a group from Meridian, from New York, institutional leaders, artists from all over. It was really extraordinary. We hosted 5 public panels all over the city of Lisbon, always pairing American artists with Portuguese artists in conversations like these, reminding us of the importance of the arts and its role in democracy and freedom of speech. Deb and Hank and Sanford joined us in Portugal to discuss their works in these incredible collections, along with photographer and Smithsonian Art Commissioner and mother of Hank, which I love, Deb Willis. And I could not be happier to share the stage with them again today. I'm looking forward to a great discussion. You could already imagine that all of us had an awful lot to say, so we're going to try to move through the questions so we can get to some questions from the audience. So I will start a question for each of you, starting with Sanford. How did it feel to be exhibited in a collection that's really the forward face of America, a tool for cultural diplomacy, hanging in a representational space? As I know too well, each of you is constantly asked to place loans in works all over the world, institutional and otherwise. Why did you choose to loan your work to this collection? What new perspectives have you gotten? And be nice, was it a good decision?
Well, for me, interestingly enough, when I was a kid, I was fascinated by the Tintin, the Flemish Tintin comic books, where you had this young man who was traveling all over the world, and my father, brother, and I used to watch James Bond, so I always had these glorified visions of myself being all over the world and, being a diplomat of sorts, let's say. And as I got deeper into becoming an artist and getting invited to show internationally, it turns out that that was a platform to actually advocate and speak about things that were happening in the US, and to expose people to different ideas and different realities in the US. So when I was asked to be part of this, it made a lot of sense because the context was exactly the context I hope my work would be seen in, being able to cross borders and oceans and to speak to many and represent voices of many.
Well, Sanford, I think one of the first times we really connected was in Poland in 2006 in an exhibition called Black Alphabet, and I've always thought of you as an international man of mystery. So he was like, yeah, I've been here before, I've been in Italy and Japan, and that was not sponsored by the United States government, and it was a really fascinating experience in 2006 to go to Poland with a group of 20 African-American artists, because contemporary artists, because an exhibition like that had not existed in the United States at that time from different generations. And I was very fortunate through Art and Embassies in 2014 to be part of a program in South Africa, and was really excited to get to go to Portugal, a place I'd never been before, and to be at the Woodstock of civic engagement in Portugal was really, really, really exciting and life-changing. And to see the work that I did with Eric Gottesman and a Wyatt Gallery, who are my collaborators on the Four Freedoms photographs, and I also want to acknowledge Michelle Wu and Claudia Pena, my colleagues at Four Freedoms, an organization that's goal is to put art in public discourse through using fine art thinking, and it was really inspired by our engagements with Art and Embassies and understanding that art has a really critical role in civic life that is often understated. And so somehow it seems like our idea, our hypothesis is bearing out, which is really great.
Deborah?
Well, it was really fun, and for me, it was not a usual experience at all, and it was great to be in a context in this democracy collection, and also the events over the 3 days. It's a context I always did see my work in, but doesn't always get to be in. So for me, it was a real opportunity, and it was super fun to hang out with these guys, and it was a blast.
We had a good crew.
Yeah, definitely a good crew.
Where's your next post?
That's right. What's next?
Right, you can ask the president. Don't quote me on that. Deb Willis, as a highly respected academic in the arts, I'd love to hear your impressions of the events that we did in Portugal. Do you think that this kind of diplomacy moves the needle on issues of equality? And how did you measure the reactions of the Portuguese artists to the messages that the American artists were putting forward?
It was amazing and significant, mainly because home was central throughout storytelling, throughout the exhibition. The installation engaged me when we think about we're traveling the world, and like others here, we traveled the world through James Bond and through our cartoons. But the fact is, how do we reimagine home in these places? People who are traveling through difficult times for hope and for truly a democratic lifestyle. So this exhibition for me and all of the works introduced different stories about life and home, and how to reimagine it engaged me immensely.
It's funny that you say home, because when I went out to post and I went to Casa Carlucci, I felt like one of my obligations was to turn the house into a home, because when people come to a home, they have a level of calm and relaxation and comfort that they don't have in a public institution. So one of the things that I really tried to do, which I'm sure made Post and the federal government and my house staff crazy, was to turn the house into a home. And the art, of course, brought warmth and brought color and brought perspective So one of the comments that I get quite often is that this really feels like a home and not a yes.
And that's what it felt, installation. He guided us through different narratives, and that was a wonderful experience for all of us.
Well, thank you for noticing that. Sanford. Both you and Hank are part of the Four Freedoms Collective, as you told us, so I know that you create your art with intentional messaging in mind. Tell us how you felt about seeing your tapestry work hanging next to actually my personal work, an iconic Lisbon quilt. I was so excited about that. What historical reference does this work reflect, and were you thinking of that history when you created this piece?
Sure. So Madam Ambassador is referring to this work behind us. It was merely by the context of seeing this beautiful work in the bastion of sort of white male modernism and seeing how strong and how poignant the work was and how it redefined my sense of aesthetics and two-dimensional work and painting and so on, that it started to influence this body of work where I started to add different fabrics and sometimes intervene with tar and paint and charcoal on these objects. So to have it in Portugal next to an actual Lisbon quilt was sort of bringing all of those initiatives home in a sense. And it is interesting that we keep referring to that because the whole experience, and particularly even my interaction with some of the Portuguese artists, it all seemed like we'd known each other before and we were sharing these similar stories. Our experiences somehow were very similar. And I think that's also the kind of comfort that you get when you see a quilt in the first place. It makes you think of home, nostalgia, memory, the body, even though the body is invisible, but somehow we can viscerally associate with that work. And it takes us all back to that place. So it was great to feel sort of in a place that I was, in essence, a foreigner, but somehow also a native.
Well, I think that I was impressed. The art community in Portugal is very small, but very strong and really has not got their moment. And I was so impressed with how quickly all of you bonded. I mean, I had to literally pull them back. They were leaving to go to somebody's studio. I'm like, wait, you can't leave. You're the guest of honor. But it was really amazing to see. So where that universal language sort of comes together and you identify yourself and the common issues that you share with others. And I think that was amazing. And it was really amazing for the Portuguese art community because exposure to you, who are so accomplished in your craft, is really so elevating for them. So it was an incredible experience for them as well. Hank, when you sell to collectors, you don't always get to see your pieces in situ, especially in international collections. What was it like for you to not only see your pieces, but watch the American and Portuguese audiences interact with them? And how did you view my favorite vignette, as you know, which is the placement of a place to call home, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about it, next to Ultima Barreira, The Last Barrier, by the Angolan artist Delia Jase?
Yeah, well, first, of course, I want to commend you again for your incredible commitment to art and artists and arts institutions and organizations. And I had never been to Portugal, so my expectations were actually pretty low. Which always good. Yeah, actually, it was incredible. Yeah, and I learned a lot. I actually just saw my work as a pass key. It was like, oh, my work went there, and so I get to come. and so like, yeah, exactly. But then I get to come and I get changed, and the access, especially in this context of having work and placement at the residence of a U.S. ambassador, was really unique, and seeing how thoughtfully the whole space was curated. This piece, A Place to Call Home, Africa, America, is really thinking about an expedition that began in Portugal in many ways and landed in this place where people were already inhabiting, but that has changed the course of history. And so A Place to Call Home, looking at the home of North America and South America, which are where the largest diasporic African communities are as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, is really thinking a lot about the impact of globalization, of commodity and colonialism. And it seemed surprising to me that you weren't steering away from some of the complicated history of our country. And then with the inclusion of the Four Freedoms photographs that we made, finding out that professors at universities in Portugal were using our pictures to talk about not only American democracy, but the concept of democracy, because a lot of the issues that affect the United States relate to immigration, as well as just general inclusion are also relevant there. And so I was really I felt really blessed.
So just for context, Hank's amazing piece is hanging next to two pieces by an Angolan artist named Delio Jassé. And as many of you probably know, Portugal was a colonizing country for over 500 years, and Delio Jassé does his art about what it was like to be a black Angolan when Portugal decolonized from Angola in 1974. So those issues of identity, are you African or are you American? Are you Portuguese? Are you Angolan? Really resonate in both places. And in Portugal, I think in Europe in general, many of us would agree that people don't talk about the history of racism, the slave project, the same way that the Smithsonian is doing, the same way we do in America. So it's been interesting to see the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Portugal, the Minister of Culture, come and look at this art and confront these issues and see the difference. I felt like your art allows me to be able to bring these conversations to the table in a very subtle and open way. So never underestimate soft power.
And one of the images featured a same-sex couple as parents, and this was in a Catholic institution, and someone mentioned to me that if it weren't for this program, these pictures would never be allowed in the school, which was also really fascinating.
100%, and the rector there, Isabel Gil, is a good friend and a very forward-thinking woman, and that was absolutely controversial and probably the most talked about piece. Those are the conversations we're trying to provoke. Deborah Kass, when I called you to ask you to participate in this collection, because anytime I do anything, you're my first call. I SOS you first. Without hesitation, you offered the piece hanging in the dining room, portraying Barbara Streisand as Yentl, and you've done so many pieces featuring Barbara. We have a mutual love of Barbara. But can you tell us why and what the representation of her image means to you?
Yeah, well, when you called and asked, given the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and the incredibly alarming rise in America, I thought it was really important to show this particular work of art that was made 31 years ago. But it seemed like the right time for it in the right place. There she is. My fascination with Barbara Streisand started when I was probably 12, maybe 13. And Barbara herself was all of 22, 23. And Streisand took Broadway by storm in Funny Girl when she was 21. And I was just sort of becoming aware of the outside world at that time. And I'd kind of grown up with my parents' nostalgia around movies and music. And back then, before streaming and before cable, regular TV would show movies from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s over and over and over again. So it was pretty clear to me, even at 12 and 13, that this person looked completely different than every other movie star. And she looked, in fact, like most of the people I knew, which was extremely radical. And I knew it was deeply radical at 13. And it was the first time I saw myself represented sort of in popular culture. And it kind of blew my mind. So Barbara became a role model, and I thought back then, well, if she could do it with chutzpah and talent, so can I. And now I would say, or other people would say, if you can see it, you can be it. So that's the reason I put Barbara up there in Portugal. Cannot be ignored, the place of the Inquisition, where Jews were forced to convert to Catholicism in the 15th century, 16th century, or tortured and murdered, or expelled in 1496 from the port of Lisbon. So that was all on my mind when I picked this 31-year-old image to install.
Fantastic. When you talked about that at the panel, I was so struck because, most recently we had Michelle Obama saying exactly the same thing, that it was, I'm here so that young women can look up and say, there's someone who looks like me that accomplishes all of these things. So I think it points out the fact that in every wave of immigration and every cultural group where there's representation, there's really hope and inspiration. So I was really moved. Thank you for sharing that. I was really moved by that. And I'm also such a giant Babs fan myself.
She's the
As you
best.
know.
She's the greatest of all time. And I just want to say, this is a girl at 25 who had a Tony, an Emmy, and a Grammy. And then when she was 27, she got the Oscar. So she literally is the youngest EGOT ever.
And you also going to talk about your billboard.
Okay, I'm going to talk about my billboard. For Freedoms has organized right now a billboard project about anti-Semitism that involves 13 artists, correct? And it's a diverse group of artists, because I think one of the things that has to be said that's never said quite enough, if you add up the women, the people of color, the Jews, the homosexuals, the LGBTQ, and the trans people who are being targeted by the right wing right now, we are the majority. And we need to see ourselves as the majority. And we need to vote. Because, so I'm thrilled, again, to be involved in this project, but also to be included in the bigger conversation Randy and the entire Democracy Collection represents. I think it's really important right now.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, a quick rapid fire question. We'll start with you, Deb Willis, for everyone, and then I'll answer it at the end. So, besides your own piece or your son's piece, which of the pieces in the collection at the residence resonated with you most?
I would say the living room. What resonated for me was the idea of rest. Sitting in your space, I had an opportunity to rest from the trip, but also rest and think thoughtfully about all of the objects that were in front of me, from the books to the Carol Walker piece. So I felt rest was a significant point in looking at the work, because I exhaled in that space.
I'm gonna have to try that. So far that's not working for me, but I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna go back with an open mind. Sanford?
I feel seeing all the work in the context of the home there was something special about it. It had the same sort of gravitas as a museum. The context, however, being a home, let all of us have a public moment with the work, but you can walk around and have independent private moments with the work. And the way they spoke amongst the chorus of the other works there, I think, was something very special. Two works that stuck out to me, Nick Cave's work and Nan Golden's work. Nan. I think it was the candles, the Fatima. Yeah?
Yes.
And I think something about that photograph was something about the, I guess, sort of solemnity of it, the performative nature of just drooping and hanging candles. Something about that was very lyrical and indicative of her work, basically.
Yes, and in Portugal it's the 3 Fs. It's Fado, football, and Fatima. So needless to say, when the Portuguese guests walk in and they walk through the central hall stairs, and to their left they see a photograph of the candles of Fatima, it's very meaningful. And I think we need to take a minute and talk about Helena Almeida and Vasco Arujo and Julian Sarmento and Joana Vasconcelos and some of the really amazing Portuguese artists whose point of view and works really enhanced the collection as well. Hank?
Yeah, that was exciting to get to meet some of the Portuguese artists there in that space, and thinking about how, I don't know, it felt unique. It wasn't just about us coming there, it was about them also having many of them had been to your house before, and felt like they were able to, as artists, be in discourse with you was really powerful. What was the room that we went to that's upstairs? Yes, could you describe that room?
So the reason that the residence is called Casa Carlucci is because Frank Carlucci in the mid-70s was the ambassador there, and that was the time post the Salazar dictatorship when it looked like the communists were going to take over the Portuguese government. And Frank Carlucci actually called Henry Kissinger and said, no, 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 Portugal can be a democracy. And they had kind of written it off. So at the very top of this beautiful residence, which is the highest point in Lapa, is this beautiful room called the Crow's Nest, where Mario Suarez, the resistance leader, met with Frank Carlucci for many days and many hours, and was one of the most important locations where the history of Portuguese democracy was formed. And in fact, next year will be the 50th anniversary of democracy in Portugal. And I've had most of the Carluccis over, but I hope to get them all together with Marcia and have them back to talk about the importance of that room and that history. But we definitely have to up the art in there. Really.
And the wallpaper kind of echoes your dress.
What? Oh, yes. Well, we'll
But
talk about
that's the important aspect about the space. It's a study collection, a study in history, a study in modern art, and political and politics. So that's the important why I see that space, the space of the embassy home, as a study and respite, just a chance to talk about politics, talk about family, and to think about migration from the 15th century to now.
Sure. Deborah?
All right, we're going from the sublime to the ridiculous. I love the Kathy Opie 700 Nemes room, which is close-ups of Elizabeth Taylor's closets.
It's amazing.
And they're beautiful. They're beautiful. They're formally beautiful. And as a pop culture freak and someone who's also worked with Elizabeth Taylor in my own work, I adored that.
So I can't say a favorite because I don't have a favorite, but the biggest surprise for me was actually your work, Hank, that's entitled Ain't I a Woman? So I'm only the second woman to serve as ambassador in Portugal, and I said, oh, how kind of tongue-in-cheek would it be to have hanging at the top of the staircase as all these folks come to visit a painting that says, Ain't I a Woman? And at the time, I did not realize that Ain't I a Woman is the name of a very important speech given by an abolitionist and suffragist in the 1940s named Sojourner Truth. And so it's really Ain't I a Woman Too is the name of the speech. So for me, it was such a great surprise. And I think that's the point. You know, people could come in and see the art for what it is on the surface, and then they can do a deeper dive if they're willing to, or they're enticed to do so, do a deeper dive into what the art means in terms of the social context.
And you placed it next to Keith Haring.
I did. Did you like that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that.
Yeah.
Oh, you liked it? Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure about that, so thank you for that. And I have to say, I also have a Hank Willis Thomas Sakai collab jacket. So I sent Hank a picture the other day and I said, this is the U.S. ambassador to Portugal in a Hank Willis Thomas jacket standing under a Hank Willis Thomas work. I don't think anyone has ever sent that to you before.
I got to talk to the U.S. ambassador to Japan now, so we can close
Okay,
that.
right. Okay, we could do that. Before we close, do we have time for questions? We do. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for these amazing artists? Or me? Hi. Could you stand up?
Sure.
Great.
I'll speak loudly. I was very pleased to hear that in Portugal, the work that you're doing, Ambassador, is impacting those conversations in universities and such, especially around democracy. I'm curious from any of the panelists if you have ideas of things that we can be bringing back to the United States from other countries, because we seem to, believe we have all the best ideas, but there's so much to learn globally, and since we have an international history and everybody's so well traveled, I wondered if in your travels abroad, especially conversations with artists, are there things that you would want to bring back to the United States?
Do we have any volunteers to answer?
I have a quick answer. I was having this conversation last weekend, and it's a very simple gesture. Rest. Taking time, walking, talking to people, literally not at people, but with people, and making that a normal part of the day or the week or whatever it might be, so that we bring back the civil in civilization.
Yeah, that's really important point is we talk about a grind culture all the time, and now to think about what you just said, it's so true. That this is something we could bring back to talk about works and transform our lives through the arts. Thank you. Thank you for that question.
Well, one of the things I took away from the conversations with some of the Portuguese artists was, that there's support for artists who are not rich and famous to have a career and make things that are culturally relevant, but also that they're not, because of that, they're not attached to the commercial fine art market. So there was like, I don't want to say there was some judgment, but there was definitely like an awareness of like, yeah, we just make art. We're not trying to, yes, if it sells, great, but like I want to make art, and I feel like it's important. And that was a kind of a reminder for me, because in New York, it's so expensive to live in New York that if you're not able to sell art, you're not really able to keep going in the same way. And that was just kind of a real kind of reminder for me, and that there are other ways to live as an artist than outside of New York.
Yeah, I want to amplify that. Whenever I'm in Europe traveling and talking to artists, they're shocked at how much we are the only way to support yourself in America as an artist is in the market, unless you're an academic. And there's so much more support for the arts in Europe, meaning the government support. And it's shocking and a real problem in this country that really needs to be addressed. There's very little government support for artists, and artists in Europe are shocked by it.
I do think that the level of confidence that you guys have in your craft and in your messaging was something that really was noted by the Portuguese artists, and something that I do think they aspire to. I agree with you, they seem to have a much better handle on work-life balance. Don't try to have a meeting with the Portuguese government when they're on vacation. It doesn't matter if there's an earthquake or a hurricane. But I think that a balance between those two, I mean, that's what we're all striving for, right? In our personal and professional lives, is that balance. Susan?
Thank you. I want to thank Director Megan Beyer for this really important program, and you, Ambassador Levine, are an embodiment of cultural diplomacy. I think it shows the importance of really sparking conversations. Do other countries have programs like this, art in their embassies, and is there a global forum for crosswalking lessons learned and perspectives?
I have anecdotally tried to find that out, and we actually had a big meeting with the UK, the counterpart in the UK, and they had 5,500, I think, pieces of art in their collection, and it was all, over the years that had been donated or purchased by the government. And so we had congressional leaders with us last night, and I really drove home the point that 80% of what we do for those exhibitions in these residences like Randy's that are so important, frontline and soft power tools, 80% are through the kindness and generosity and patriotism of artists. And so I don't think there's any other country that does the bespoke, customized exhibition for every ambassador. I have not found one yet. Most of them have art that's been installed in those residences.
Thank you so much.
It's interesting because I have been looking for people to work with cooperatively, groups of countries, particularly allies of ours abroad, so that we could do group shows, and we were talking about Aboriginal art, etc. And nobody seems to have the access to that type of art. They'd have to go to an institution and borrow the art. So I don't believe that it's been deployed. So I'm just told I need to wrap up. So this has been such a joy. Very quickly, how lucky are we to have these artists be representing us in America and abroad, the best of the best. And I just have to finish up with a shout out to Ambassador Moser and to my friend Megan Beyer. I think that we can all agree that anything that the extraordinary, indefatigable Megan Beyer does, she raises the bar, and she sets the high standard for all of us. I have been delighted that she's pulled me along, and I know and I hope that everyone in this room will continue to be willing to support the Art and Embassies program. Now that you see and now that I see how it works and we deploy it on the ground, it's so important. So thank you, Megan, for being our leader and adding life and vibrancy to this program. And thanks to all of you.